and Pinsk were martyred by the hundreds. The fleeing wagons of Jews were overtaken in narrow paths, and many were slain. The Polish troops, however, sought justice. When General Duke Radziwiłł, charged with defense of the Kingdom of Lithuania, heard that the people of Pinsk had allowed the scoundrels entry, he gathered several thousand soldiers, besieged the city, and set it aflame on all four sides. Those who attempted to escape by boat drowned, others were burned or killed, and thus the Jews were avenged. Similar retribution befell the city of Sluck, where local inhabitants notified the enemy of hidden Jews and nobles, yet the Jews had already fled. When the attackers arrived, cannon fire from the walls drove them back, and the fleeing scoundrels were pursued and utterly destroyed. Then Khmelnytsky and his army, together with the Tartars, turned their attention to the fortified city of Bar, a stronghold where a large Jewish community and noble families had sought refuge. The enemies approached, but the gunners on the walls defended their city fiercely, raining bullets upon those who dared to climb or breach the ramparts. They were unable to storm the city, and for the moment, the defenders held fast. The city of Bar, a once thriving community of Jews and Polish nobles, fell under siege for many days. The local people, Ukrainians who had once lived peacefully alongside their neighbors, dug secret tunnels under the city walls under cover of night. Through these tunnels, the enemies, Khmelnytsky, the oppressor, and his Cossack and Tartar forces slipped into the city. The massacre began in the darkness. The Jews and the Polish nobles had taken refuge in the mighty fortress at the heart of Bar. Its walls were strong and well fortified, and inside there were no Ukrainians to betray them. But the enemies laid siege relentlessly, building mounds and protective bulwarks against the fortress and firing large cannons, which in the German language were called Roderbixen. After days of bombardment and siege, the fortress fell. The enemies killed all the Jews and Polish nobles within, inflicting upon them the most violent and horrific deaths, and took their possessions as plunder. Approximately 2,000 Jewish men, women, and children were slain in Bar. Khmelnytsky, may his name be blotted out, did not pause. He marched with his army to the city of Konstantinov, then to the holy community of Zaslav, and onward to the capital city of Ostrog, each of which had already suffered destruction at the hands of the Ukrainians. From Ostrog he pressed on to Great Dubno, a fortress of unsurpassed strength under the rule of General Duke Władysław Dominik. But when the Duke and his nobles fled the battlefield, several hundred Jews who had hoped to seek refuge in the fortress remained outside. As the enemies approached, the Duke sent a general and 80 of his soldiers into the fortress, locking it securely with bolts and bars, preventing the Jews from entering. In the shadow of the impenetrable walls, Khmelnytsky and his forces slaughtered approximately 1,100 Jews, leaving none alive. When Khmelnytsky arrived and saw the strength of the fortress of Dubno, he marveled. He admitted it would have been impossible to capture without a great siege, and he condemned the fleeing nobles for their cowardice. Great treasures of the Jews and nobles were stored within the fortress, yet Khmelnytsky refrained from besieging it, unwilling to risk his forces against its walls. From Dubno he turned toward the city of Brody, the seat of General Choronzi, an enemy who had long sought Khmelnytsky's destruction. Khmelnytsky devastated the surrounding provinces, setting Brody, the metropolis of Choronzi's domain, ablaze. Many Jews and nobles fled into the fortress of Brody, which, with its double walls and protective moat, seemed nearly impregnable. For days the enemy attempted to breach the fortress, but the defenders held firm. Yet terror gripped the people inside, for a plague broke out within the walls. 1,000 Jewish men, women, and children perished from disease, as fear of the sword outside mingled with the terror and sickness within. Plagues of similar proportions struck other fortresses under siege by the enemies, claiming many lives before the sword could even reach them. After these attacks, Khmelnytsky, may his name be blotted out, and his army turned toward the holy community of Lwów, one of the 4 largest communities in the Kingdom of Poland. Lwów was a city renowned for its sages and scribes, a bastion of learning and wealth. Khmelnytsky's forces encamped in the valley facing the tall fort outside the city, and a burst of fire from the fort's cannons killed thousands of Ukrainians and Tartars. But lacking water for their own forces, the Polish defenders were forced to abandon the fort and retreat into the city. The inhabitants, desperate to prevent the enemy from hiding among their homes, set fire to the houses surrounding the walls. Nevertheless, the enemies captured the fort and encircled the city. The people were trapped, fearful to leave their homes under constant shell fire. Hunger and plague spread through the streets. The scripture had foretold, "Without shall the sword bereave, and in the chambers terror," and now it was fulfilled. 10,000 souls perished from starvation and disease. As the siege dragged on, the city's leaders resolved to ransom their lives. They sent messages to Khmelnytsky, offering all the silver and gold they could gather. Khmelnytsky agreed, sending his captain Glowacki, a former Polish officer who had turned traitor and joined the Cossacks, along with other officers to negotiate terms. Reputable nobles, together with Reb Simeon Stadlin of Luau, a representative and negotiator for the Jewish community, went to meet them. The terms demanded 250,000 gold pieces, but the Jews and nobles could not raise such a sum. They surrendered silver, gold, and other valuables at far below market value. The Cossacks stripped the city like a drained fish pond, taking everything that could be carried. Had it not been for the compassion of the Lord upon the thousands of Jews, renowned sages who had labored in penance and prayer, the city would have perished entirely from hunger and thirst. From Luau, Khmelnytsky's forces moved toward the city of Zolki. The attackers attempted to scale the walls with ladders, but the defenders poured boiling water upon them, forcing the enemy to retreat. The courage of the defenders and the prayers of the righteous held even in the face of overwhelming terror and destruction. The attackers, Khmelnytsky, may his name be blotted out, and his army of Cossacks and Tartars approached each city with cunning and terror. At each fortress they came upon, the gunners of the defenders fired their cannons, killing many of the enemies, yet the oppressors were undeterred. They met in council and decided it was better to propose a compromise, just as they had done in the city of Luau. A message was sent to the people of the besieged city, declaring, "You are not stronger than the defenders of Luau, who were forced to surrender and pay a ransom. If you accept compromise, it will be well. If not, we shall besiege you and inflict terrible deaths upon you, as we have done in other places." The citizens, seeing a chance to preserve their lives, sent a delegation of a priest, a nobleman, and a Jew from Chernigow in Little Russia to negotiate the terms. It was agreed that the city would pay 20,000 gold pieces, 6,000 of which would go to Captain Glowacki, a former Polish officer who had turned traitor and joined the Cossacks. Several thousand Cossacks were left behind to guard the city, ensuring that other raiding parties would not attack it again. Khmelnytsky and his forces followed the same pattern of terror throughout the kingdoms of Little Poland, Russia, Podolia, and Lithuania, spreading distress and suffering wherever they went. In the strong fortress of Kameniec-Podolski, as well as in the cities of Yazlowitz, Buchach, Komarno, Belz, and in the monastery of Sokol, the nobles and Jews defended themselves fiercely. They fired their heavy cannons at the enemies, killing many and forcing the raiders to retreat in humiliation. In these fortresses, compromise or ransom was not even offered, yet disease and starvation claimed thousands of lives within the walls, as the besieged endured famine and pestilence. The city of Przemysl, renowned for its scholars and scribes, was also besieged. It nearly fell, but divine mercy prevailed. A general named Kornekt, with 600 loyal troops, arrived with ingenuity and courage, rescuing the city. Still, all the surrounding cities and villages up to the river San were laid waste, leaving death and ruin in their wake. From there, Khmelnytsky turned toward the holy community of Narol. Tens of thousands of Jews and thousands of nobles had gathered in this city, which had no Ukrainian inhabitants among them. The city was composed of 3 large contiguous settlements. The Jews wished to flee, but the city official forbade it. He insisted, "Let us stand and fight as the fortified cities before us have done." When the enemies laid siege, they proposed a compromise. The Jews were willing, but the city official rejected it. For 3 days, they fought fiercely, inflicting heavy losses upon the enemy. Yet, on the 17th day of the month of Heshvan in the year 409 of the Common Era, Khmelnytsky sent an overwhelming reinforcement of troops, as numerous as the sand of the sea. The city fell. First, the city official, named Lasch, was captured and skinned alive, subjected to unimaginable tortures. Then more than 12,000 Jewish men, women, and children were slaughtered in terrible ways. Many were drowned in the water, while several hundred sought refuge in the synagogue. The enemies smashed through its doors, killed all inside, and set fire to the holy place, burning it along with the bodies of the slain. Many were taken captive by the Tartars, while the 3 settlements were set ablaze and destroyed, reminiscent of the destruction of Sodom. A woman who survived testified that several hundred women, children, and a few men remained alive. They had no food for 5 days and resorted to eating human flesh, cutting organs from the dead and roasting them over fire. Thousands more were devoured by dogs and swine. Some survivors sent men to the city of Przemysl to purchase linen for shrouds with several hundred gold pieces, so that the victims could be buried properly. May the Lord recompense them for their deeds. Khmelnytsky and his vast army of Cossacks and Tartars then marched onward to the holy community of Zamość, a city unmatched in strength. Its walls were double, and it was surrounded by a deep moat. Upon arrival, the townspeople burned all houses near the walls, preventing the enemy from hiding close to the city. For many days, the defenders held their ground, forcing the enemies to remain at a distance of half a mile. Meanwhile, Khmelnytsky's forces spread terror throughout the surrounding communities, massacring Jews in Tomaszów, Szczebrzeszyn, Turbin, Hrubieszów, Tarnograd, Bilgorai, Gora, and Krasnik. Tens of thousands were killed. In the province of Volhynia, in the cities of Włodzimierz-Wolyński, Lubomla, Luk, and Khmelnyts, similar horrors unfolded. In Khmelnyts, a Cossack raider seized a slaughtering knife and killed several hundred Jewish children. In mockery, he asked a comrade if they were kosher or trefa, meaning fit or unfit according to Jewish dietary law. When the comrade replied, trefa, he threw the children to the dogs. He then carried a child on a spear through the streets, calling out as though selling goats and sheep, turning innocent children into instruments of terror. Near the narrow paths of Bichau, several hundred Jewish carts were overtaken, and all inside were killed. These massacres occurred across hundreds of communities, leaving destruction and sorrow from the kingdoms of Poland and Lithuania all the way to the Vistula River. The fury of Khmelnytsky and his allies cannot be fully recorded. For more than 700 communities, cities, and settlements were devastated, their people slain, and their homes burned to ashes. Though the oppressors, Khmelnytsky, may his name be blotted out, and his vast army of Tartars and Cossacks besieged the city of Zamość for many long days, they were unable to conquer it. The city was defended by a German general named Weiher, a man of experience in war, who commanded 6,000 well-trained German troops. From the tall walls of the city, they released cannon fire that tore through the enemy ranks, killing thousands and striking fear into the hearts of the attackers. Yet, even within the strong walls, the people suffered. Starvation and plague spread among the Jews, claiming the lives of thousands. As time passed, the enemies resorted to superstition and dark arts. Using witchcraft, they released a viper into the night sky, interpreting its flight as a sign from the heavens. They proclaimed, "If the viper turns his face toward the city, we shall subdue it. If it turns toward us, we shall flee." At midnight, the serpent hovered for half an hour facing the city, then turned toward the camp of the Cossacks and Tartars. Terrified by this omen, the enemies sent emissaries to the people of Zamość, saying, "Is it not better for you to compromise with us, as did the holy community of Lwów, than to die of starvation?" The inhabitants, eager to save their lives, agreed and paid 20,000 gold pieces as ransom. In the aftermath, many prisoners were ransomed by the Jews of the city, saving hundreds of souls from a terrible fate. May the Lord recompense them for their kindness. With Zamość secured by compromise, Khmelnytsky and his forces turned toward the metropolis of Lublin, one of the 4 greatest communities in the Kingdom of Poland, famed for its scholars, its wealth, and its acts of loving kindness. Most of the townspeople had fled beyond the Vistula River, leaving behind only the poorer citizens. They provided these remaining inhabitants with sufficient funds to care for themselves and for refugees who had fled from other devastated cities. Meanwhile, all the nobles and dukes of the Kingdom of Poland gathered in Krakow, the ancient metropolis of Poland, to elect a new king, ensuring that the kingdom would not be like sheep without a shepherd. Among the candidates were Casimir, the Cardinal of Gniezno and second son of King Sigismund, his brother Carlos, and the Lord of Siebenbergen in the Kingdom of Hungary, named Rakoczy. When Chmiel learned of this, he sent emissaries to the nobles and dukes in Krakow, declaring that if they elected Casimir as king, he would withdraw and cease his attacks on the kingdom. The nobles and dukes, finding this favorable, elected Casimir as king. In the year 5409, in the month of Cheshvan, King Casimir was crowned. He was a just and God-fearing ruler, a friend of Israel, who took as his wife the widow of his deceased brother Ladislaw. Once King Casimir was securely on the throne, he dispatched letters to the oppressor Chmiel, instructing him to return home with his army and promising that all grievances against the Kingdom of Poland would be resolved peacefully. Chmiel, then advancing to capture the city of Lublin, received the letter when he was only 4 miles away. Welcoming it with joy, he immediately turned his forces homeward. That winter, the land rested from war, and the merit of the people of Lublin, who had shown kindness to the refugees of the house of Israel, saved them from the sword. Yet the city itself suffered greatly. During the siege, Zamosk and Lublin were shut and closed. No one could enter or leave. Plague struck the inhabitants with a force unmatched, claiming the lives of more than 10,000 Jewish souls. Among the Jews who had fled across the Vistula River, the disease spread rapidly. They buried their dead in the darkness of night, so that unfriendly neighbors might not see their grief or rejoice at a new grave. This plague was unlike any other, God forbid, striking with high fever and death, following swiftly from exposure and exhaustion. Many poor Jews, refused shelter by the Gentiles, slept in the streets and died from hunger and the bitter cold. Fathers could offer no aid to their children, and neighbors could not help one another. More than 100,000 Jews perished during this time, impoverished and bereft. Those who survived were forced to sell whatever treasures they retained for a fraction of their true value. Silver, gold, and garments were exchanged for half their worth, while silk and other fine fabrics went for a third of their value. Sacred books and Torah scrolls lay forgotten in deserted corners that, for the Gentiles, sought only gold and silver, caring nothing for learning or faith. When the Jews learned that the enemies had returned home and that the nobles were also leaving their estates, they too began their return. They made their way back to cities and towns where Polish nobles had resumed control, traveling as far as the city of Zaslaw. Eastward from there was not a nobleman or Jew remaining, for all other places were occupied by scoundrels. Approximately 2,000 soldiers, remnants of the forces of Duke Dominic and Duke Korecki, guarded the cities of Ostrog, Zaslaw, and Korek. The Jews placed their trust first in God and then in these remaining troops, hoping to find refuge for themselves and their families. They also hoped that the townspeople would repay the debts owed to them, seeking some measure of justice and restoration amid the ruins. The second massacre of Ostrog began under a cruel cloak of deception. The townspeople, cunning in their ways, first presented themselves as friends to the Jews. They wrote letters to those Jews who had once been inhabitants of Ostrog, who now lived in surrounding communities, inviting them to return. "Fear not the Cossacks," they promised, "for the king has made peace with them." Poor Jews, weary from flight and terror, rejoiced at this promise. They believed it to be true, and 300 souls returned to Ostrog, trusting in the safety of their old homes. For 3 weeks, from the first day of the month of Adar until Tuesday, the 18th day of Adar, in the year 4409, the Jews dwelled in Ostrog, unaware of the betrayal looming over them. At midnight of the 19th day of that same month, the townspeople revealed their treachery. They sent word to the Cossacks in the vicinity, informing them that many Jews and nobles had gathered in Ostrog, and assuring them of aid against these peaceful citizens. As darkness fell, thousands of Cossacks poured into the city. They struck swiftly, slaying all the nobles and Jews in their beds. Only 3 Jews and 1 officer of the nobles, together with 80 of his warriors, managed to escape. The Cossacks pursued them relentlessly. The nobles fled, turning occasionally to strike back, leaving a trail of destruction among their pursuers, until only a few Ukrainians survived to return to the city. The news of this massacre spread quickly. Jews and nobles from Zaslaw and nearby communities fled in terror, seeking refuge in Great Dubno, Olika, and Khmelnytsky, When King Casimir, may his glory increase, and the princes of Poland learned that the Ukrainians continued to rebel, the king appointed Prince Furli as general. He was entrusted with an army of 30,000 men, tasked with bringing the rebellious Ukrainians to justice. General Furli advanced upon the city of Ostrog, inflicting great judgments upon the people there, exacting vengeance for the slaughter of the innocent. From Ostrog, he moved to the city of Zaslaw, where, near the newly built portion of the city, adjacent to the fortress, he waged a fierce battle against the Ukrainians. Several hundred Jewish men of strength, poor folk who had taken up arms, joined him in this pursuit of justice, striking at the enemies who had wrought so much destruction. General Furli did not act alone. Khmelnytsky, the voivoda of Khmelnytsky, a title meaning the governor or military commander of a city, brought several thousand seasoned troops to the city of Ozogauche, 9 miles from Zaslaw, and struck at the Ukrainians from another direction. The battles were merciless. For 12 long weeks, the armies of Poland exacted vengeance upon the Ukrainians, repaying them for the same cruelty that had been inflicted upon the Jews and nobles. General Furli and his forces then joined Khmelnytsky at the city of Chehansky-Kamien, preparing for a major confrontation. Meanwhile, Chmiel, the oppressor, gathered his forces, biding his time for 3 months. He sent word to the Tartar king, summoning a multitude of Tartar warriors to join him in a renewed assault. Learning of this, General Furli sent urgent letters to King Casimir, may his glory increase, calling for all nobles throughout the Kingdom of Poland to enlist and aid their brethren in the war. The king obeyed, issuing a decree that all officers whose names appeared in the royal registry must either go to war themselves or send their servants in their place. Failure to comply would result in the loss of rank. Despite the decree, the nobles were slow in mobilizing, while the Tartars and Ukrainians, countless as the sand of the sea, advanced swiftly. The Polish forces moved 6 more miles to the cities of Bermuch and Zbaraz, where Duke Wisniowiecki and his brother-in-law, General Chorąży, together with several thousand veteran soldiers from Lwów, joined the army. They fortified Zbaraz, building water obstacles around the city to slow the advance of the enemy. On the new moon of the month of Ab, in the year 4409, Tsar Khan, the king of the Tartars, arrived with a vast multitude like the sand of the sea, accompanied by Chmiel and his Ukrainian forces. They encircled the Polish army from a distance, but could not breach the fortifications. The cannons from the city walls tore through their ranks, killing tens of thousands. The siege lasted 7 long weeks, during which many Polish nobles perished from starvation. General Furli himself fell in this engagement. Duke Wisniowiecki, however, inspired his people through cunning. He circulated false messages, supposedly written by King Casimir, claiming that a large Polish army was on its way to relieve them. This deception kept the soldiers and townspeople steadfast, preventing their surrender despite the severe hunger that led them to eat horses and dogs. Occasionally, Duke Wisniowiecki and General Chorąży, with their troops, would leave the fort through secret tunnels, striking the Ukrainians and Tartars suddenly, killing tens of thousands. The Duke himself led these attacks, marching at the head of his men to encourage them, ensuring that fear and despair did not consume their hearts. When King Casimir, may his glory increase, learned of the dire situation, he prepared his chariot and personally set out to aid his besieged forces, bringing with him 20,000 seasoned troops. All the nobles of Poland were summoned to follow him, yet the king did not wait for their arrival. With his 20,000 men, he advanced to relieve his people in distress, determined to face the multitude of enemies and the tide of war that had consumed the Kingdom of Poland. When King Casimir, may his glory increase, approached the encampment of the Ukrainians and Tartars, he found himself surrounded by hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers, their numbers like the sand upon the seashore. The sight struck fear into the hearts of the Polish army. The soldiers trembled, their courage melting within them, and not a single man dared to draw his sword. The king looked about him, anger blazing in his heart, for he saw that there was no one willing to stand and fight. The Tartars, fierce and relentless, nearly captured the king alive, and he recognized the evil that pressed against him on every side. With wisdom born of necessity, he decided to lead his forces toward the city of Zborow, a small and nearby stronghold where they might find refuge. In the city of Zboro, King Casimir waged a battle against the Ukrainians and Tartars for 2 long days. During this time, he dispatched his aide, the nobleman Ossolinsky, a man of rank and diplomacy, to speak with Jar Khan, the king of the Tartars, to negotiate a truce. The goal was to compel the oppressor Chmiel to consent to peace. At last, the fighting ceased, and Tsar Khan, accompanied by several hundred of his men, entered the city of Zboro to speak directly with King Casimir. They discussed the terms of a truce. The agreement required the king, may his glory increase, to pay 200,000 gold pieces, a debt owed to Jar Khan by a previous arrangement that the king had failed to honor. Additionally, 2 generals who were held in the Tsar's custody were to be returned to the king for a ransom of 100,000 gold pieces. To ensure the payment, the king placed several high-ranking Polish nobles as surety. When Chmiel, the oppressor, learned that the Tartars had reached a truce with the king, fear gripped him. He went to the city of Zboro, fell at the feet of King Casimir, and with tears pleaded for mercy, claiming that all the havoc he had wrought was the fault of the nobles themselves. He discussed many matters in secrecy, matters never revealed to any man, yet the king, proud and just, spoke to him only through an interpreter. Ultimately, a compromise was reached. Khmelnytsky and his army would return to their homes, while 5 high-ranking officers would later be sent by the king to negotiate the terms between the Ukrainians and the Polish people. Among the many requests Chmiel made were that 30,000 Cossacks be exempt from taxes, that he be permitted to select them from any provinces under the king's rule or the nobles, and that the city of Cheharan and its surrounding lands belong to him and his descendants forever. He also demanded that 1 Cossack leader be appointed as one of the 7 voyevodas in the king's assembly, and that Jews be prohibited from settling where these 30,000 Cossacks resided. Many of these demands were impossible to grant, yet the king persuaded Chmiel to return home, leaving the formal negotiations to the 5 commissioners. As the Tartars and Ukrainians departed, they exacted vengeance upon the Ukrainian towns and villages that had rebelled against the king. Cities such as Ostrog, Zaslak, Khmelnytsky, Basilia, and Satano, and the surrounding regions up to Kamyanets-Podolsky were devastated. Homes were burned, many inhabitants slain, and tens of thousands taken captive by the Tatars. Only those who hid in forests and swamps survived. This great destruction was understood as divine retribution for the people of Israel, and even the surviving Ukrainian populace accepted it as just punishment. For the entire year of 4,110 and the following year, 4,111, according to the minor reckoning, the land had respite from war, lasting until the Feast of Passover. After the Feast of Tabernacles in the year 4,110, the Polish nobles returned to their estates. The remaining Jews, orphans of orphans, returned as well, destitute and poor, yet they found no true relief. Prices for food remained high, and the famine caused by the loss of money and treasures at the hands of the Cossacks and Tartars continued. Wealthy Ukrainians fled across the Dnieper River, fearing the nobles' retribution, while others hid their fortunes. The Jews, though impoverished, were perceived as wealthy by the multitude, and demands for payment, taxes, and tributes were relentless. They were forced to surrender what little remained of their silver, gold, and garments, often at half or a fraction of their true value. Books, including sacred Torah scrolls, were worthless in this time of desperation, left to gather dust in deserted corners. When word spread that the enemy had returned home and the nobles were resuming their estates, the Jews slowly made their way back to communities where Polish nobles were present, traveling even to the city of Zaslaw. Eastward, there was not a single nobleman or Jew to be found, for many regions were still occupied by rogue elements. Approximately 2,000 soldiers, remnants of the forces of Duke Dominik and Duke Korecki, remained in charge of Ostrog, Zaslaw, and Koretz. The Jews placed their trust first in God and then in these forces, hoping to find refuge for their families and to recover debts owed to them by the townspeople. In those days, the Jews boldly returned to publicly practice their religion in every place where they dwelt. In the regions where the Cossacks, the fierce warrior horsemen of the Ukrainian steppe, resided, and where no Jews lived at that time, the forced converts, Those who had been compelled under duress to abandon their faith fled to communities populated by Jews. Many women who had been married by force to Cossacks sought refuge in these Jewish towns, and thus hundreds of converts reclaimed their faith and returned to Judaism. In places where the carnage had been most severe, hundreds of children, boys, girls, and infants, had been forcibly converted. The Jewish communities took them back, often forcibly removing them from the hands of the Gentiles. After careful investigation, each child was given an identifying tag around their neck, stating the family to which they belonged, so that their heritage would not be lost. Many women had become agunoth, women whose husbands had disappeared or been killed, and who were unable to remarry without their husband's presence or permission. Many widows, who had become subject to levirate marriage, a law obliging a man to marry his deceased brother's widow to preserve the family line, were also left in limbo as the levir had fled or died. The authorities of the Council of Four Lands, a central body of Jewish self-governance in the Kingdom of Poland, established ordinances to assist these women and children. They instituted a public fast to be observed on the 20th day of the month of Sivan, commemorating the massacre of the Jewish community of Nemero, which had been among the first to fall victim to the slaughter for the glorification of the name of God. During this time, King Casimir, may his glory increase, elevated Duke Jeremy Wisniewski, a powerful noble and warrior above all others, appointing him supreme general of the entire Polish army. The Duke, however, would not accept the title unless it was permanent and unconditional, and only until the two generals held captive by the Tartars, General Potocki and General Khmelnytsky, returned. Only then would Duke Wisniewski lead the army across the river Dnieper to subdue the Cossacks and restore order with the help of God. When Khmelnytsky, the ruthless Cossack leader, heard of this, he feared for his life. He sent urgent messages to the Tartar king requesting the release of the two Polish generals, not out of respect or friendship, but to prevent Duke Wisniewski from becoming supreme general. The Tartar king, seeing his advantage, released the two generals, and they were restored to their former commands, surprising King Casimir and the Polish nobles. Meanwhile, Khmelnytsky, with his army of Cossacks and Tartars, attacked the provinces of Wallachia, destroying them because they had sheltered Polish nobles and Jews, and because the Wallachians had freed hundreds of captives previously taken by the Tartars. Upon returning from Wallachia, Khmelnytsky's forces brought back a vast amount of loot, some of which they sold to the Jews. Yet no Jew suffered injury this time, for the king's peace with them remained in effect. At the same time, rebellion broke out among the Russians of the province of Moscow, who were joined by Cossack renegades. Khmelnytsky sent letters to King Casimir, assuring him that he would subdue the Muscovites, but the king, wise and discerning, recognized this as a ploy and maintained peace with Moscow. Efforts to settle with the Cossacks were unsuccessful as their demands were impossible to meet. Prior to the festival of Passover in the year 4111, according to the minor reckoning, the Tartars and Ukrainians assembled for a fourth time, and on that Passover the children of Israel suffered greatly. Hundreds of Jews were slain, and hundreds more were carried into captivity by the Tartars. Once again, the people of Israel fled, this time to the metropolis of Lwów, a city renowned for its scholars and sages, seeking safety from the relentless violence. King Casimir, may his glory increase, personally led an army of 300,000 Polish soldiers, reinforced by 80,000 mercenaries from Germany, France, and Spain, and accompanied by 1,000 Jewish fighters. 300,000 additional Polish soldiers were stationed near Lublin to prevent famine and ensure the people were not concentrated in one location. Such a gathering of troops had never been seen in the Kingdom of Poland since its founding. The Tartars and Ukrainians also amassed vast forces, countless as the sand upon the seashore. The king prepared for a decisive battle, pitching his tent in the monastery of the city of Sokol, while the army readied itself for combat between Sokol and the city of Berestechko. With them were the two generals, Potocki and Khmelnytsky, and Duke Jeremy Wisniewski. The Tartars and Ukrainians arrived suddenly, their war cries echoing across the plains, confident that they could defeat the Poles as they had in previous campaigns. At first, they inflicted severe damage upon the Polish forces. Yet the Polish army, strengthened and reinforced by the disciplined German troops, rallied. They struck a decisive blow against the Tartars and Ukrainians, pursuing them relentlessly. The Tartar king fled to his homeland in great humiliation, accompanied by only a small fraction of his forces. He took Khmelnytsky with him into captivity, for Khmelnytsky had failed to reveal the true strength of the Polish army, causing the Tartar king the embarrassment of retreating with minimal forces. All the high-ranking officers, including the nephew of the Tartar king, were captured by the Polish army. The remaining Cossack forces were then besieged for many days, facing the full might of the king's army. As the Cossacks and Tartars arose in the evening, they abandoned their tents, leaving behind horses, carts brimming with food, weapons, and every treasure from the camp, fleeing in terror for their lives. The king, Casimir, may his glory increase, together with his nobles and loyal followers, returned to their homes with great rejoicing, their hearts lifted in relief and thanksgiving, on the 17th day of the month of Ab in the year 4111, according to the minor Jewish reckoning. The Tartar king, ruler of the vast and fearsome Tartar Empire, sent letters to King Casimir requesting the release of his nephew in exchange for the oppressor Khmelnytsky, who was then held captive, along with 4,000 high-ranking Polish nobles who had been seized during the previous campaigns. But King Casimir, with great pride and resolve, refused. He declared that Khmelnytsky would remain his prisoner, for he intended to capture him by force at a later time, sending a clear message that he and his people were prepared to wage war against the Tartars. The king then dispatched his 2 generals and Duke Jeremy Wisniowiecki, along with 150,000 able-bodied warriors, to conquer all the Ukrainian cities in the land of Little Russia and to prepare for war against the Tartars afterward. One by one, they captured the cities of Little Russia, asserting the authority of the Polish crown. However, jealousy brewed among the nobles, who envied the rising fame and popularity of Duke Wisniowiecki. In a treacherous act, they presented him with a deadly poison, and the great duke died, leaving behind a 16-year-old son who inherited his father's strength and courage, taking his place in the defense of the kingdom. The Tartar king, hearing of the death of Duke Wisniowiecki and aware that the 2 generals were preparing to make war, sought peace with Khmelnytsky. The oppressor paid the Tartars a ransom of 18 million gold pieces, gaining their favor and support. Yet undeterred, the Tartars and the Ukrainians assembled once more, a 5th time, their numbers vast as the sand upon the seashore, preparing to strike Poland anew. Thus, the Great War resumed after the Holy Days in the year 4112, according to the minor reckoning. The conflict raged back and forth, sometimes the enemy gaining ground, sometimes the king prevailing. Meanwhile, the children of Israel, the Jewish communities of the kingdom, continued to grow impoverished, burdened by the constant waves of war. A severe epidemic struck the entire kingdom of Poland. In the city of Krakow, Poland's ancient capital and center of commerce and learning, and in other communities, more than 20,000 souls perished during the summer of the year 4112, according to the minor reckoning. The sword, famine, and plague reigned over the kingdom, each day bringing greater tragedy than the day before. The people lived in despair, longing for relief, yet none came. In the midst of these calamities, the Jews turned to the enduring pillars of their faith and practice. From the days of Simon the Just, one of the last survivors of the great synagogue of Jerusalem, the world had rested upon 3 pillars: the study of the Torah, divine service, and the practice of charity. Rabban Simeon, son of Gamaliel, taught that the world is preserved by truth, judgment, and peace. In the kingdom of Poland, all 6 of these pillars flourished. The pillar of the Torah was upheld with devotion. Jewish communities across the kingdom maintained academies, with the head of each academy supported by a generous salary to dedicate himself fully to the study and teaching of Torah. He rarely left his house, venturing only between his home, the house of study, and the synagogue, engaged day and night in learning. Each community supported young men with weekly allowances so that they could study under the academy heads. In addition, 2 younger boys were assigned to each young man to learn the Gemara, the Talmudic commentaries of Rashi, and the Tosafoth. These boys, too, were provided with food from communal funds or public kitchens. In communities with 50 householders, no fewer than 30 young men and boys were supported. Each householder provided food and drink for one young man and two boys for the entire year, often allowing them to eat at the family table, like treating them as their own children. In this way, the study of Torah was woven into the very fabric of daily life. In almost every home in the Kingdom of Poland, someone was immersed in Torah study, whether the head of the family, a son-in-law, or one of the young scholars eating at their table. In many houses, all of these scholars could be found together, each contributing to the preservation of knowledge and the spiritual life of the people. Thus, the words of Rabbah, recorded in Tractate Sabbath, chapter 1, became manifest in the Kingdom of Poland. Rabbah had said, "He who loves the rabbis will have sons who are rabbis. He who honors the rabbis will have rabbis for sons-in-law. He who stands in awe of the rabbis will himself be a rabbinical scholar." Indeed, in every Jewish community, these teachings came to life. In a community of 50 householders, there were often 20 scholars who achieved the title Morenu, meaning our teacher, or Haver, meaning colleague, marking them as learned authorities in the law. The head of the academy stood above all of them, guiding the scholars and students who would gather each day to listen to his discourses, to question him, and to sharpen their understanding of the sacred texts. The program of study was rigorous and structured. The academies, known as yeshivot, operated in two main seasons. In the summer, from the first day of the month of Iyar until the 15th day of the month of Ab, and in the winter, from the first day of the month of Cheshvan until the 15th day of the month of Shavat. All students were required to study under the guidance of the academy head. From the 15th day of Shavat or the 15th day of Ab, they were free to study wherever they chose. During the study periods from the first day of Iyar until the Feast of Weeks, which celebrates the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and from the first day of Cheshvan until the Festival of Lights, Chanukah, the students devoted themselves to the Gemara, the core text of the Talmud, along with the commentaries of Rashi, the great medieval commentator, and the Tosafoth, a collection of critical and explanatory notes. Each day, they studied a halacha, a single page of Gemara with its accompanying commentaries. The head of the academy alone sat upon a chair, while the scholars and students stood around him discussing matters of the law until his arrival, when silence fell and he began to speak. Each scholar posed the questions that troubled him, and the head of the academy, with wisdom and clarity, provided explanations. The lectures often turned to a chiluk, a discussion of a difference in the interpretations of two authorities. He would cite contradictions from the Gemara, Rashi, or Tosafoth, question omissions, present opposing statements, and offer solutions, sometimes perplexing, until the law was clarified. In summer, they did not leave the academy before noon. From the Feast of Weeks until the New Year, and from Chanukah until the Feast of Passover, the head of the academy devoted time to studying legal codes such as the Arba Turim, known as the Four Rows, along with commentaries and other works, such as those by Rav Alfasi, guiding the young men in both theory and practical application of the law. Weeks before the 15th day of Ab or Shavat, the head of the academy honored scholars and students alike by letting them lead discussions, exercising their intellect, and preparing them for future leadership in the community. The same tractate, studied in proper sequence across the 6 orders of the Talmud, united all academies in method and devotion. Each academy had a dedicated inspector responsible for ensuring that all students, rich or poor, studied diligently. The inspector visited daily, warned students not to loiter in the streets, and on Thursdays examined them. Those who could not recite their weekly studies or erred were flogged publicly, a harsh but effective method to instill discipline. On the eve of the Sabbath, all students gathered before the head of the academy for further questioning. During the 3 days preceding the Feast of Weeks and during Chanukah, the young men and boys reviewed all they had studied, and community leaders offered gifts of money to encourage diligence. Once the 15th day of Ab or Shavat arrived, the academy head, accompanied by his students, would travel to the great fairs. In summer, they attended the fairs of Zaslau and Jaroslau. In winter, the fairs of Luau and Lublin. At these fairs, young men and boys could study in any academy of their choice. Scholars, merchants, and crowds of Gentiles, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, gathered from every corner of the world. At the fairs, marriages were arranged for sons and daughters, and hundreds, sometimes thousands, of matches were made. Jewish men and women walked through the bustling crowds in garments of fine quality, reflecting the esteem in which they were held by rulers and Gentiles alike. In every community, the head of the academy held great honor. His words guided rich and poor. None questioned his authority. He carried a stick and a lash, symbols of his power to chastise transgressors, establish ordinances, and safeguard the sanctity of the law. Under his vigilant guidance, the children of Israel and the Kingdom of Poland continued the sacred tradition of learning, discipline, and reverence for the Torah, passing it from one generation to the next. Nevertheless, the hearts of all were devoted to the head of the academy. Any householder who possessed a good portion of food, such as fatted fowl, capons, or fine fish, would honor the head of the academy with half or all of his portion. Gifts of silver and gold were offered without measure, freely and generously, for his wisdom and guidance were treasured. Even in the synagogue, those who had purchased honors for Torah reading would bestow them upon the head of the academy. It was customary and obligatory to call him up to the Torah reading third, on the Sabbath and on the first days of the festivals, for he represented the pinnacle of scholarship and piety. Should the head of the academy be a Cohen, a descendant of the priestly tribe, or a Levite, he would take precedence even over others entitled to the honor of Cohen or Levi, or the concluding portion of the Torah reading. On the Sabbath and on the festivals, no one left the synagogue until the head of the academy departed first, followed by his students, and the entire congregation would accompany them to his home. On festive occasions, the entire community went to greet him at his residence, showering him with respect and reverence. Because of this honor, scholars studied with great diligence, striving to one day rise to such a position, to become heads of academies themselves. Out of the desire for recognition, many began to perform acts of goodness, and thus from self-interest grew true devotion, and the land was filled with knowledge. The pillar of divine service held equal prominence. In the absence of the temple in Jerusalem, prayer had replaced the sacrificial service, as it is written in the Psalms, "So we will render for bullocks the offering of our lips." At the head of the devout were those known as Shomrim Laboker, they that watch for the morning, a fellowship of men who rose before dawn to pray and to mourn the destruction of the Holy Temple. With the coming of dawn, the members of the Shevra Tehillim, the Society of Psalms, would rise to recite the entire book of Psalms for about an hour, completing the cycle week by week. No man, under ordinary circumstances, would oversleep and miss the appointed hour of prayer. Upon entering the synagogue, a man would not depart for his business until he had heard words of the law expounded by a scholar, or a passage from the commentary of Rashi, the Torah, the prophets, the Hagiographa, the Mishnah, or the laws of ritual. In every synagogue, groups of scholars taught immediately after morning and evening prayers, so that all might go from strength to strength, every one of them appearing before God in Zion. The pillar of charity flourished beyond measure in the Kingdom of Poland, especially in matters of hospitality. If a scholar or preacher visited a community, he did not need to seek permission or humiliate himself to gain a ticket of hospitality. Instead, he went to a community leader and was welcomed freely. The community beadle, an officer responsible for records and order, would collect funds for the visit and ensure that gifts were presented with dignity. The scholar or guest could stay as long as he desired, receiving food and drink morning, noon, and evening, and when departing, he was provided with provisions and sometimes escorted by horse and carriage to the next community. Young men, boys, unmarried girls, and travelers were given garments, apprenticeships in trades, or placements in households. Those who wished to study were provided with teachers, and, when ready, were married to daughters of wealthy families, often accompanied by dowries of several thousand gold pieces and garments befitting royalty. These scholars, the true royalty of the people, would then return to study in great academies, and upon returning home, the father-in-law would establish an academy for him, funding it generously and inviting other scholars to attend, nurturing the next generation of academy heads. Even those not yet accomplished but eager to study were given support, food, clothing, and instruction, and later married with similar generosity. Likewise, poor unmarried girls were cared for, and no girl reached the age of 18 without marriage arrangements, a testament to the piety and benevolence of the community leaders. The pillar of justice mirrored the courts of Jerusalem before the destruction of the temple. Every city had a court, and if one refused to be judged locally, he went to the nearest court. Should he refuse there, he went to the great court of the province. In the capital city of Ostrog, the great court presided over the province of Volhynia and the Ukraine, and in the capital city of Lwów, the great court governed Russia. If two prominent communities had disputes, they submitted to the Council of Four Lands, a central authority composed of one leader from each major community, along with 6 great scholars from across the Kingdom of Poland. This council met twice a year, during the fair at Lublin between the festival of Purim and the festival of Passover, and during the fair at Jaroslaw in the month of Ab or Elul, ensuring that justice was administered fairly across the land. In this way, through scholarship, prayer, charity, and justice, the children of Israel in the Kingdom of Poland built a world of learning, devotion, and righteousness, even amidst the turbulence and trials of their age. The leaders of the Four Lands, known as the Vad Arba Aratzot, held authority like that of the ancient Sanhedrin in the Chamber of Hewn Stones, the sacred tribunal of Jerusalem. They were empowered to judge all the children of Israel living in the Kingdom of Poland, to establish safeguards for the community, to institute ordinances, and to punish each man as they deemed appropriate. Matters of great difficulty, disputes over money, fines, and complex legal questions were brought before them, and their word was final. To aid them in this monumental task, the leaders of the Four Lands appointed judges in each province, called judges of the provinces, who oversaw local matters, particularly those involving financial transactions. No Jewish dispute was ever permitted to be taken before a Gentile judge, a Polish noble, or even the king himself. Should any Jew attempt to bring a case before a non-Jewish court, he was severely punished to observe the principle, even our enemies themselves being judges, ensuring that all justice among the Jewish people remained in their own hands. The pillar of truth was equally revered. Every community appointed men responsible for overseeing weights and measures and supervising business dealings, so that all trade would be conducted honestly and with integrity. The pillar of peace was observed in daily life, for it is written, "The Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace." In Poland, no 3 people would sit down to a meal without engaging in the study of Torah, debating laws, puzzling over difficult passages in the Midrashim, the rabbinic commentaries, and discussing the wisdom of the ages. Every meal became an opportunity for learning, to fulfill the verse, "Thy law is in my inmost parts." Even when the children of Israel were among foreign peoples, the Holy One, blessed be he, did not abandon them, nor break his covenant with them. Wherever they traveled, to Moravia, Austria, Bohemia, Germany, Italy, or other lands, they were treated with generosity. Those taken captive by the Tartars were brought to Constantinople, the mother city of Israel, and to the famed city of Salonika in present-day Greece, as well as to Jewish communities in Turkey, Egypt, and Barbary in North Africa. There, the captives were ransomed for great sums of money, as described before, and even to this day, communities continue the sacred work of ransoming prisoners brought into captivity as a testament to their enduring compassion. Those who survived the sword of the enemy were treated with hospitality, provided with food, drink, lodging, and garments according to their importance. In Germany, especially, the generosity of the Jewish communities knew no bounds, extending even beyond what might have been expected. May their justice be recognized by the Almighty, shielding all Israel wherever they are gathered, so that the children of Israel might dwell in peace and tranquility in their homes. May their merit be counted for the people and for their children, that the Lord might hearken to their cries, gather the dispersed from the 4 corners of the earth, and send the righteous Messiah speedily in our day. Amen. Salah. The Jewish leaders of Poland, through the Council of Four Lands, upheld the pillars of Torah, charity, justice, truth, peace, and divine service, creating a resilient community that, even in the midst of exile, massacre, and dispersion, maintained learning, worship, and righteousness. Their efforts safeguarded the lives, faith, and dignity of the children in an age of turmoil, leaving a legacy of courage, scholarship, and piety that would echo through the generations. The leaders of the four lands, the Vad Arba Aratzot, served as the highest authority for all the children of Israel in the Kingdom of Poland, much like the Sanhedrin in the Chamber of Hewn Stones in the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. They had the sacred power to judge difficult cases, establish communal safeguards, enact ordinances, and punish transgressors. Each complex matter, financial disputes, fines, titles, or other legal challenges, was brought before them. To lighten their burden, they appointed judges in the provinces, called judges of the provinces, who administered local cases, especially involving monetary affairs. No Jewish dispute was permitted to be adjudicated before a non-Jewish court. A Polish noble, or even before the King of Poland, may his glory increase. If a Jew dared to bring his case before a Gentile judge, he faced severe chastisement. For it was commanded, even our enemies themselves being judges, to ensure the community's autonomy and justice remained in the hands of the children of Israel. Truth was a pillar of life, upheld in every community. Officials ensured the fairness of weights and measures and oversaw business transactions so that honesty prevailed in every market and household. Peace was another pillar, observed in daily conduct and speech. It was said, "The Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace." Even meals became forums of study where no three people without discussing Torah, analyzing the law, and debating the midrashim, the ancient rabbinic commentaries. The study of Torah permeated every aspect of life, fulfilling the verse, "Thy law is in my inmost parts." The children of Israel, even when scattered among foreign lands, were sustained by the mercy of the Holy One, blessed be he. Wherever they traveled, Moravia, Austria, Bohemia, Germany, Italy, and beyond, they were received with generosity, provided with food, drink, clothing, and lodging according to their standing. Those captured by the Tartars were transported to Constantinople, a city revered as the mother of Israel, to Salonika in present-day Greece, and to Jewish communities in Turkey, Egypt, and Barbary in North Africa. Their captives were ransomed for considerable sums of money, and even to this day, Jewish communities continue this sacred work, ransoming prisoners from captivity as an act of piety and justice. The generosity of the Jewish communities was remarkable. Survivors of massacres or flight were welcomed, provided for, and clothed. Scholars and students who came seeking knowledge were supported with instruction, clothing, and food. And when they became accomplished, wealthy patrons would provide dowries and arrange marriages, ensuring that scholarship and virtue were passed to the next generation. Thus, the pillars of Torah, divine service, charity, justice, truth, and peace remained unshaken, fortifying the Jewish people even in times of massacre, exile, and upheaval. The councils of the four lands maintained courts in every city. If a person refused judgment from the local court, he could go to the nearest provincial court, and if still refused, he could bring the matter before the great court for the entire province. In Volhynia, the great court was seated in the capital city of Ostrog. In the region of Little Russia, the court sat in Lwów, now Lemberg. When disputes arose between important communities, they were brought before the leaders of the Council of Four Lands, may the Rock and Redeemer preserve them, who met twice yearly, during the Fair of Lublin, between the festivals of Purim and Passover, and during the Fair of Jaroslaw in the month of Ab, or Elul. The leaders of the four lands had authority reminiscent of the ancient Sanhedrin. They could judge all matters concerning the children of Israel, institute ordinances, and punish those who transgressed. Their decisions were final. Judges of the provinces were appointed to manage day-to-day legal matters, especially those involving money. Never was a Jewish dispute brought before a Gentile or the king. May his glory increase, and any violation of this principle brought severe punishment. Every community also appointed men to oversee weights, measures, and trade, ensuring that all transactions were conducted truthfully. Peace and learning were woven into daily life, with Torah studied at every meal, disputes debated, and knowledge shared. This devotion was a shield, protecting the people even when they were scattered across Europe. Those who survived the massacres of the Tartars, the Cossacks, and other oppressors were treated with generosity wherever they went, provided food, lodging, clothing, and protection. Jewish communities, particularly in Germany, welcomed them with open arms, showing the depth of their charity. Thus the children of Israel, even amid calamity and exile, sustained their faith, their study, and their justice. Their leaders, their scholars, and their communities created a resilient structure that preserved life, law, and learning, keeping the heritage of Israel alive against the tide of destruction. Conclusion. Note, as we conclude the narration of Abyss of Despair by Nathan Ben Moses Hannover, we are reminded of the profound lessons that history imparts. This story, though steeped in hardship and sorrow, teaches us about the resilience of the human spirit, the complexities of societal life, and the consequences of intolerance and conflict. It is important to remember that this account is shared for educational purposes, to illuminate the past and foster understanding. It is not intended to sow hatred or division, but rather to encourage reflection, empathy, and a commitment to building a more compassionate and aware society. May the lessons of this history inspire us to remember, learn, and act with wisdom and humanity in our own lives.